Hello, I am Professor Bernard Woodrow of the Department of Electrical Engineering at Stanford University. I'm recording this video today in the David Packard building on the Stanford campus. What I'd like to tell you about today is the subject of cognitive memory. This has to do with developing a memory system for a computer that would be human-like. But to design it and make it human-like, it's necessary to think quite a bit about how human memory actually works, as well as we can figure this out. I have been working in the field of pattern recognition and learning systems since approximately 1957, I would say, quite a while ago. And the subject of pattern recognition became very popular worldwide. Today you have thousands of people working on the subject all over the world, and we're able to make pattern recognition systems that are getting better and better, but still a long way from human or animal capability. So about 10 years ago, I just stopped and said to myself, how does human pattern recognition work? What exactly is going on when we're seeing? And I began to think more and more about it and get a fundamental view of what pattern recognition really is. And what that is a comparison of an object that you're facing right now, and you're not quite sure what it is, and what you're doing is comparing that with objects that you've seen in the past that have already been identified. So you're comparing something that's incoming now, visually, auditorially, or otherwise, and you're comparing that with objects, data, stored in memory. So then I began to think about memory. I realized that for pattern recognition and many other things, memory is truly fundamental. And the more you think about memory, the more you realize how important memory is for all mental processes. Without human memory, it would be analogous to a computer without a hard drive or without RAM. You wouldn't be able to do very much with it. Now, what I'd like to do is to show you some slides that will help us in communicating this idea. So let's have a look. I ask three questions. How does human memory work? How could I build a memory like that? How could I use it to solve practical problems? Why do we want to do this? We want to design a memory system that is as simple as possible, but behaves like and emulates human memory. Why do we want to do it? To develop a new kind of memory for computers to facilitate solutions to problems in AI, pattern recognition, speech recognition, control systems, etc. And the second purpose is to advance cognitive science with new insight into the working of human memory. So this has been a pretty ambitious project, and I think that, as we develop along in our discussion, you'll see and get a better idea. It sounds a little bit crazy to try to understand human memory, and even more crazy to try to build a human-like memory for a computer. But anyhow, that's what we're doing. Features of the cognitive memory. Let me read some of this. I'll stand in front of the screen. Cognitive memory stores sensory patterns, visual, auditory, tactile, radar, sonar, etc., all kinds of input patterns stores patterns wherever space is available, not in specified memory locations. So right away you can see that this is not like a typical computer memory. Stores simultaneously sensed input patterns in the same folder. Example, simultaneous visual and auditory patterns are stored together. Now the idea of a folder, I'll use that idea as a metaphor for a certain kind of organizing function that I think is needed for human memory, or human-like memory. I don't believe that the human brain has file folders inside of itself. Data recovery is in response to prompt input patterns. Example, a visual or auditory input pattern would trigger recall. So this is quite different from a computer memory. Auto-associative neural networks are used in the data retrieval system. And not everybody that knows about neural networks knows about auto-associative ones. These are very simple, and I can explain that to you quite easily. Now, a computer memory has registers that are numbered. And data is stored in these registers. The CPU stores data in registers. And when the CPU needs that data back again for processing, the CPU knows exactly where to go to get the data. And the CPU asks the memory for the contents of register number, blah, blah, blah. And the memory restores that data to the CPU. CPU knows exactly what it is. That's basically how the computer works. This is different. You store data wherever there's space available. You retrieve data by prompts. And the prompt, how the prompting works, we'll see. But prompting is how you get data from this type of memory. So let's go on. Let me get next slide. Here's a block diagram of parts of the cognitive memory. So you see on the left, we have visual inputs, auditory inputs, other sensory inputs. There's a visual cortex. I believe what happens in the visual cortex is that the visual images are processed in a certain way that I'll describe in a few moments. There's an auditory cortex and other cortexes. This collection of sensory inputs forms a pattern vector, which is components of that vector are visual, auditory, and other sensory signals. This goes through a switch, an interesting switch, interesting question mark. So what this means is that you're going to record things when you're out in the world recording. You're going to record things that are interesting. Now how that works, that's a whole separate subject. But assume that there is such a thing, and we won't worry about that right now. Now the sensory input vector goes up and over to a memory input line. And the patterns in that signal, that input data signal, go into memory folders. Now what you're looking for is an empty memory folder. So you can record a block of data in a memory folder. You can record more data in another memory folder. So each memory segment, we describe the human memory as broken up into segments. We will describe a memory for computer that's also broken up into segments. So each segment has a memory folder, it has a multiplexer, and it has a neural network. And a few other things that you'll see in a few moments. Let's say you come into my office and you visit with me for a half hour. So we have a very nice discussion. I'll be recording images of your face, the sounds of your voice, the sounds of my voice, scenes all around the room, etc. So we're recording video, picture and sound, and other things. When you come into my office, we shake hands, so I have tactile patterns, etc. All that goes into the memory folder, and all those patterns are there. Now, we need to train a neural network, and this hourglass-shaped object is a symbolic representation of a neural network. We apply inputs at the top of the neural network, and we get outputs at the bottom of the neural network. The neural network will be trained to take its input patterns and trained to produce output patterns that correspond to the input pattern. So we compare the input pattern with the output pattern. The difference between the two is an error, and the error is used in adjusting the coefficients or the weights or the parameters of the neural network. What the multiplexer does is it scans through all the patterns in that memory folder of the particular segment. In scanning through these patterns, it does it over and over and over again. And those patterns are trained repetitively into the neural network. And the learning algorithm in the neural network is such to adapt the weights, the parameters, or you can call them synapses, of the neural network to cause the error to be as small as possible. The error is a vector. The input to the neural net is a vector. The output of the neural net is a vector. So the difference, which is formed right here, you take this plus that minus, the difference is the error. So anyhow, when you're using the memory and when you're sleeping at night, you're training that neural net. So you're training that neural net most of the day and most of the night. So there's a lot of training going on in that neural network, and it's trained over and over again on the patterns that happen to be stored in the memory folder that's attached to that neural net. Now let me show you some more slides. Without getting into great details of the neural net, we look at on the left. We have an input pattern coming into the neural network. The output pattern comes out. And normally when you're training the neural network, you apply an input pattern and you apply a desired response pattern. That's the output response that you'd like for that particular input. So when you're training this thing as a classifier, you feed in input patterns, training patterns, and when you feed in an input pattern, you also feed the desired response, which is a representation that you want at the output of the neural net for that input pattern. So in other words, if you apply an input pattern that's the letter A, then you have a coded output response that corresponds to the letter A. You put in the letter B, you train it to give a different output, the coded output response that corresponds to the letter B. Now, that's the normal way that neural nets are trained. A little more unusual is auto-associative training. And here the input patterns come in. The output pattern is compared with the input pattern. The difference is an error. And for the set of input training patterns, you train this thing to minimize the mean square of the error. And by making the error small, you cause that neural net to produce output patterns that correspond to the input pattern. Now that seems like a silly thing to do. Why do you need this neural net? If you have the input pattern, why do you need this neural net to give you the output pattern? Well, the answer is that you want that neural net to do something that's a little unusual. The patterns, particular patterns that you train in, when you apply them subsequently to training, you apply these input patterns, they will produce output patterns that correspond to the input pattern. If you apply an input pattern different from a pattern that you trained in other words, a pattern that you didn't train in, you put that pattern in and you get an output pattern that will be different from the input pattern. That difference will cause an error. So what you're using this neural network to do is to tell you, when you apply an input pattern, whether it's ever seen that pattern before. If it's seen that pattern before, déjà vu. If it hasn't seen that pattern before, it will tell you no. So you either make a hit, get very, very low error, which means you've seen the pattern before, or you get a very big error, and that tells you that you've never seen that pattern before, and the network has not been trained on that particular pattern. So the purpose of the neural net is déjà vu. Have I seen that pattern before or not? And that's autoassociative. Now notice that with supervised training on the left, you apply an input pattern and a desired response pattern. So given an input pattern, somebody or something has to decide what the desired response pattern should be. With autoassociative training, there's no external desired response. All you're doing is applying input patterns. This is a very simple kind of training, and I think that that's the kind of training that goes on in human memory, and I'll tell you why I think that. But it's a kind of training that is totally unsupervised. All you do is apply input patterns. So if you have a source, you're going around in the real world and you're looking at things, you're seeing input patterns. These input patterns will come into that neural net, and if they're interesting, you're going to record them in the memory folder. Then you're going to recycle those patterns over and over again into this neural network and train it so that well, I'll tell you what, let me go back to the previous slide. If we look at this, input patterns are coming in and going into the memory folders. So if a memory folder is empty, you can put the next folder in line. You load it with input patterns. Now those patterns go to the multiplexer that sequences them in the training of the neural network. Now the neural network the neural network will be able to tell you whether or not an input pattern corresponds to one of the patterns in that memory folder. So any pattern not in that memory folder will not make a hit, but a pattern in that memory folder, incoming, will make a hit. Now let's look at another slide right here. So now the memory folders have data. With training, the neural nets are all trained to make a hit with any input pattern that corresponds to a pattern in its corresponding memory folder. So now you go out, the memory is all full of data. You've been out in the real world, you're observing all kinds of things. And let's say you see something, it goes in through the visual cortex. What you're seeing seems interesting as far as the interesting switch is concerned. It goes through, and now that goes on to the prompt line. So the prompt line is a bus that goes throughout the entire memory. You can have many of these segments. You can have as many segments as you like. You can make that memory as big as you like, and it doesn't, by making the memory bigger, it doesn't increase the search time, it doesn't increase the storage time. The prompt line feeds an input pattern into all the neural nets. The neural nets produce outputs that are compared with the input. If the error is small, below a threshold, the switch is closed, and the output of the multiplexer, which keeps on recycling round and round and round, that output is fed to the memory output line, which is another bus that goes throughout the whole memory. So to get output from the memory, you get that whenever there's a hit. So if you see, let's say, a visual input pattern that corresponds to a pattern that you've seen before and have recorded in one of the folders, what will happen is that there will be a hit at that particular neural network, and the contents of that memory folder will be dumped and outputted on the memory output line. So what you're able to do is identify things that you've seen before. And I didn't really explain yet what the visual cortex does, the auditory cortex. Let's take the visual cortex as a for instance. When you're recording data, recording pictures, you take a snapshot. From that one snapshot, you can make many, many, many other images. You can rotate left, rotate right. You can expand, in other words, zoom in, zoom back. You can translate left, right, up, down. You can increase the intensity. You can increase the contrast. So from one snapshot, you can make hundreds of images. And all of those images would be stored in the memory folder. Now, you store all this away. You may have hundreds of thousands of images from a half-hour visit that someone comes into your office. You store that in memory folders. You don't have to store it in one. You can store it in many of them. Doesn't matter where you store it. Now, later that person that you were visiting comes to see you again, and you're seeing that person's face slightly differently than you've ever seen it before. But you take the new incoming visual image, you rotate it, translate it, scale it, and keep doing that until one of the neural networks in all these segments makes a hit, says, I know that guy, and it will start unloading everything from the memory folder, and out on the memory output line is the contents of all the stuff that you experienced on the previous visit. So it's not a usual pattern recognition system that you put in the pattern and it tells you what it is. This thing gives you, this is a memory. It gives you a whole lot of stuff. Anyhow, this is a rough, quick picture of how this works. Let me go back. Sensory input pattern storage. Sensory input patterns come from eyes, ears, tactile, olfactory, vestibular. These patterns are stored sequentially in empty folders wherever. Visual input patterns are rotated, translated, scaled, etc. by the visual cortex. Visual, auditory, and other sensory patterns received at the same time are stored in the same folder. Sequences of patterns like videos are stored in the same folder. Auto-associative networks are trained with all the patterns stored in the connected memory folder. These networks are used for data retrieval. The memory is organized in the form of independent segments to make possible a very large storage capacity. So this has to do with pattern retrieval. So the question is, déjà vu, hit or no hit? And the auto-associative networks are prompted with sensory input patterns. Visual input patterns, for example, are rotated, translated, scaled, brightened, contrast, etc. by the visual cortex while attempting to make a hit. Patterns in the folder containing the hit pattern are retrieved and sent to the memory output line. Memory output patterns, in turn, may be used as prompts to retrieve other folders. This type of feedback could cause a chain reaction, resulting in the retrieval of many interrelated folders. I have been speaking with someone for 10 minutes, but what is his name? Now I remember, it's Jonathan Jones. Okay, let's take a scenario. Suppose you're downtown in a city on a busy street. You're walking along on the sidewalk, and about 100 meters away, all of a sudden you see somebody. You say, I know that guy. What happened was déjà vu. You know that person, and the two of you are coming toward each other, and there are all sorts of people all around, people going in and out of shops and in and out of cars and doing all sorts of strange things. But you notice the face, a familiar face of a person you know. You may have seen 50 different faces, but none of them were people that you knew. So you checked every one of them to see whether you get déjà vu, and you pick one if you can find such a thing. You're always looking for a familiar face. If you see a face that's familiar, the two of you are coming toward each other, and then you stop, and now you're going to have a conversation. You're having a very nice conversation, and you could never, if you didn't know that person, you could never have had that conversation. But now you're having this conversation, and what's happening? You're saying to yourself, what is his name? And you say it again, what is his name? What is his name? What the hell is his name? But meanwhile, you're having a very nice conversation, and 10 minutes goes by, and all of a sudden, his name pops into your head. Now, all the while, that name was stored in your head. You just couldn't get it out. Retrieval is difficult. Storage is easy, relatively. So, how does that work? Well, I think you may have had a meeting. Let's say that this was a student who came into your office, and you had a half-hour conversation. When he first came into your office, he introduced himself, and he said, my name is blah, blah, blah. And that was recorded together with images of his face, the sound of his voice, all sorts of things are recorded in that folder. So there's a particular folder that has images of his face, sounds of his voice, but also the sound of his name. He introduced himself. The next time you see the person, he doesn't introduce himself again. He just comes in and you start talking. So you have many, many folders with that person, folders of that person. But there's only one of these folders that has his name in it. So you have to keep searching for that folder. Now, when you saw that person 100 meters away, and you say to yourself, I know this person, you did déjà vu. So you were able to pull a folder and produce memory output for that folder that has that person in it. But that particular folder didn't have his name in it. Now, there's things coming out of that folder, and also you're continually talking, and his face is bobbling around, so you're seeing it at different angles and different perspectives, and you're hearing the sound of his voice in different ways. And you are able to use all those inputs as prompts to prompt additional folders relative to this person. Also, every time you pull a folder, all the patterns in that folder also serve as prompts. And all these prompts are going to start prompting folders until finally you're going to prompt the folder that happens to have his name in it. You say, oh, Jonathan, how are you? And actually his name is Jonathan Jones, you see? That's how I think that works. This is a picture of an island in the Indian Ocean called Diego Garcia. We did some pattern recognition of aircraft on a runway. This comes from download of a website. And there are a whole bunch of aircraft. You can see a blow-up. This is a little bigger. And there are three kinds of aircraft there. And I took one, let's say there's a B-52, there's a B-2 stealth bomber, and a KC-135, which is a tanker aircraft. And I took put a window around one of those aircraft and made a folder for that aircraft. and identified the folder as a B52 or a KC-135, whatever the case is. And I took that one photograph, and within the window, I rotated the picture of the airplane, rotated, translated, scale changed, all a little bit. And then I was able to use that to scan over all the other aircraft and be able to identify which airplane it was, not only which it was, where it was located in XY coordinates, and it's X pixels, so many pixels X, so many pixels Y, blah, blah, blah. So that was one example of application of this kind of a memory. And that's where it searched and found an aircraft, put a target on it, and now it's going to scan around it. And the other application that I'd like to talk about is face detection. Actually, I have a video to show you on face detection. But I'll tell you a little bit first about how it works. It's a two-step process. The first step is, in a scene, identifying the human faces. The second part is, once you've identified the faces, the next thing you do is to identify who the person is. So I will show you this. Now, what we found early on was that if you have the image of a person's face on a 20 by 20 image, 20 by 20 image of that face, you realize absolutely that this is a human face. But there's no way that you can identify who that person is, even if you know that person exceedingly well. You will not know who it is. So using 20 by 20 images, we were able to train the system to recognize people's faces, pick out a human face in a background. Then the second part of the process is that once the face is identified, then we use a 50 by 50 image. We go from low resolution 20 by 20 to high resolution 50 by 50. With 50 by 50, you can easily identify whose face that is. Now, so we trained it, we picked some person, doesn't matter who, man, woman, boy, girl, human face. We had one snapshot, and from that snapshot we made 315 images. We did rotation, we did translation, we did changes in brightness, so different combinations. We had 350 patterns, and that was stored in a single folder, and the folder was labeled human face. Now you can have other kinds of objects. Each different kind of object would be in a different folder. Each pattern was adjusted by scaling. Now this is detection. Once the auto-associative neural network was trained for face detection, we then were able to apply new input patterns, take a complex scene with people's faces and other objects, and have this thing scan with a 20 by 20 window and scan the scene and pick out the human faces. So that was done by taking the objects, by scaling and translation. The errors against background, in other words, not human face, were 8 times greater than with a person's face. The neural network that we used to do this had 1,100 neurons and 400,000 weights distributed over 3 layers. Now, to identify an actual face, we had 3 pictures of me that we used for training. And we have another picture with 3 of us. On the left is Juan Carlos Aragon, then is Victor Eliashberg, and then is myself. And Juan Carlos is the one who made the video that we'll show you. Juan Carlos at that time was one of my doctoral students. Victor is an old friend. We were at Victor's house. Victor's wife shot these pictures. So she was just popping pictures. We had no idea what we were going to do with it, but I thought that we might be able to do something with it. Then I figured out what to do. Okay, so here we trained the neural net. The training set consisted of high-resolution 50 by 50 pixel images. All 3 images of my face were trained in. Each image was adjusted by rotation, 7 different angles, translation, 25 positions, left, right, up, down, scaling, 3 different window sizes. Total number of training patterns, 1,575. So those training patterns excuse me, were obtained from the three snapshots, the 3 at the top. After training, we then did an analysis of the picture below. So the human faces were picked out. Once it picks out a human face, it switches from 20 by 20 to 50 by 50. And then scaling was done with 6 window sizes. In other words, zooming in and out. Translation, left, right, up, down, 25 positions. Brightness, 6 levels of intensity. Optimization was done with each detected face. Errors with unidentified faces were 4 times greater than with my face. This auto-associative network had 1,800 neurons, 2,500 weights per neuron in the first layer, second layer, etc., etc. Total 5,800 neurons, 10,950,000 weights. We did that all with a PC with an Intel processor, and it took quite a while to do it. Now we have new ways of doing it using graphical processing units, GPUs, which seem to be running about 100 times faster. Let's see what we've got here. So this shows, in the analysis, different windows, placements you can see on my face, different window sizes and different rotations. Those are just examples to show you how that works. Now I think we could show the video at this point, which would probably work fine.
All right, whenever you're ready.
Yep. Here you can see there's a lot more going on than what you see here. This is just illustrative of the variations in the window size and the location. See now the face detection detected a face. That's Juan Carlos. Now it switches to high resolution and it's trying to identify who he is. But his face was not trained in as a person that we can identify. So it says unidentified face. Now it detected another face. That's me. So now it switches to high resolution and it's searching all over the place trying to figure out whose face this is. And it says face identified and it identifies it as Dr. Woodrow. Now it's scanning again. This is sort of like old-fashioned TV scan. So it detected Victor. The only thing is, Victor wasn't trained in as a specific face. There's only a Dr. Woodrow folder. So it's scanning and scanning and looking, trying to figure out who this is. And finally, it gives up. It's an unidentified face. This is a more difficult problem. We had photographs that we downloaded from a government agency called NIST, N-I-S-T. And these were photographs of people's faces that were meant for testing face recognition algorithms. These photos were 100 by 100 pixels. There were many, hundreds, maybe thousands of people's faces. But there were 2 photographs that were available for each individual person. So what we did is we took 1 photograph each of 75 individuals was selected for training. So what we did is made 75 folders. Each folder was labeled not by the name of the individual, we didn't have that. Each folder was labeled by the person number. So with each of those 75 photographs, the neural network for that particular folder was trained by taking the photograph of the person, rotating it, translating it, scale change, contrast change, blah, 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 blah. Okay. 75, then after the auto-associative network was trained, we then took the other photographs of each of the 75 individuals and applied that to the system. And it was able for all 75 of them to not only say, I know who that is, but I actually identify which person it is, which person number. In addition, 300 photographs of other people who were not trained in were presented to the system, and it rejected them all, saying, don't know. So it was trained on 75 photos. We made many images from each of those photos for each person in each folder. And then it was tested with 300 photographs of people not trained in. They were all rejected, and it was tested with 75 photographs, not the photograph that it was trained on, but the other photograph, and they all were identified. The right person was chosen, etc. So that was a pretty good challenge. That would be very hard for a person to do. Well, now that we've seen the basic idea of the cognitive memory, it's rather a simple concept, actually. We'll take a look, as a matter of interest, to see what was the motivation, where did all this come from, and what does this cognitive memory, as I described it, what does this have to do with human memory? So let's see what we have. None of what I tell you is for sure. No one knows for sure how brain and memory truly work. So all you could do is to speculate. Someday we may find out for sure, but that will be sometime into the future. Now we can speculate about it and try to put together a picture that seems to make sense based on practical experience living with human memory, human visual system, etc. So we look at this, and what it says is seeing involves processing and recording new visual images, making associations with pre-recorded images stored in memory. So the claim is vision and memory are intertwined. That's one of the main ideas I'd like to express. Hearing and understanding speech involves processing and recording new auditory images and making associations with pre-recorded auditory images stored in memory. Hearing and speech understanding and memory are intertwined. Now let's look beyond, see what's next. Walking and speaking. So these are motor activities, but they're controlled by thought processes. So while walking, sensory signals from all over the body deliver to the brain information about the mechanical state of the body. In other words, as you're walking, you have sensors all over the body, thousands, millions of them, tell you what the angles of the joints are, what the tensions in the muscles are, etc. And this is a pattern, it's a vector, sensory vector, it sends information up to the brain, telling it what the mechanical state of the body is as you're walking. So these sensory signals act as prompts to the memory, which in turn provides muscle control signals that enable walking. It works like a lookup table. Muscle control signals are not computed in real time, but are pulled from memory. Control planning is also pulled from memory. So muscle control depends on memory. Without memory, you can't walk, you can't talk. So while speaking, muscle control of the vocal tract is pulled from memory in response to prompts. The brain doesn't compute these control signals in real time. That's what I believe. Incidentally, in my laboratory at the moment, we're working on the application of cognitive memory ideas for control systems. And it's based on this idea. Well, this is about feature detection, but I don't think we need to do this at the moment. This is sort of a general thoughts about learning. Learning involves storing patterns in long-term memory. Learning also involves training the memory retrieval networks. Supervised learning, unsupervised learning, learning with a critic, Bayesian learning are all useful concepts, but probably have little to do with human learning. I don't think human learning works that way. We don't go around with Bayes' theorems. Every time we're looking at a pattern, we start looking it over with Bayes' theorem. As a matter of fact, I don't think there's anything in the human brain that's designed or built to do mathematics. The computer, on the other hand, has a CPU which is designed to do arithmetic operations and other operations on numbers. But there's nothing like that in the brain. That's a whole story in itself about mathematics and the brain. I think they've got nothing to do with each other. I'm going to get some water. My voice is playing tricks on me. Let's see if a little lubrication will help. Pardon me. Not bad. Okay. Now we're getting into some interesting ideas. Memory patterns are probably not stored in the brain's neurons and synapses. And the question is, why do I think this is? Why do I think memory patterns are not stored in the brain's neurons and synapses when almost every biologist believes that that's the case? They believe that when you're learning, when you're absorbing new information, that the synaptic connections, the synapses are changing in their conductivity. And I think that the neural networks of the brain the neural networks, the synapses, the dendrites, the axons, the whole structure definitely has something to do with memory. Because when people have the misfortune of getting Alzheimer's disease, the disease attacks the neural networks, gradually destroying them. And the main thing you notice is loss of memory. So the neural networks definitely has something to do with memory, but I believe that memory is not stored in the neural networks, that the neural networks are used for retrieval, not storage. So why do I think that memory patterns are not stored in the neurons and synapses? Why? Neural networks are subject to change. Neurons, synapses, dendrites die out daily in the elderly. Neurons are added daily at a very high rate in the very young. Neural wiring changes constantly and must be retrained regularly, for example, during sleep. Synapses are analog memory devices and are not suitable for long-term storage. New on-the-fly training disturbs previous synaptic training. So the neural network is too variable, too unreliable to serve as a basic storage. I believe that the basic storage needs to be digital and permanent. That once you put something in long-term memory, it's going to be there for the rest of your life. And that won't work with neural networks. Neural networks must be constantly retrained. So, old knowledge and new knowledge must be retrained in order to be maintained. It is necessary to store the training patterns. The question is, would nature store the training patterns to train the neural networks to store the training patterns? Why would you have some place to store the training patterns in order just to train the neural nets to store the training patterns? It doesn't make sense. I call it catch-22. Long-term memory is not stored in the neural networks. Neural networks are used for memory retrieval. Long-term memory is digital and solid. Wake up from sleep, anesthesia, or coma, and memory is intact and still works. Auto-associative neural networks are trained for retrieval. This is autonomous learning. It's autonomous because you don't have to provide training signals together with training patterns. Training patterns are available everywhere. Just walk down the street and you get all kinds of patterns coming at you. But no one is telling you every time you see something what the identity is. You do that by seeing something and connecting it with something in the memory. And if you can do that, then you say, I know what this is. And you can identify it. So there's a whole lot of stuff about when awake and when asleep. But basically the bottom line is that during sleep and wake, during the day, during the night, all during this time, you're training the auto-associative neural networks. Okay, now this is about innate knowledge, knowledge that you're born with. Inborn knowledge is in the form of patterns, and they are preloaded in the developing brain's memory, and this knowledge remains intact throughout one's lifetime. Examples of inborn knowledge. A bird builds a nest. Building it involves complex construction in safe places such as rooftops, treetops, telephone poles. So there's a lot of processing that goes on in that bird's head to decide where to build a nest and how to build it. That's a non-trivial thing. Here's another example. A baby bird is born knowing how to fly. The baby bird, when it comes time to fly, the baby bird goes to the edge of the nest and takes a leap. And that baby bird has to fly, never flown before. It has to fly. And if it doesn't, it's going to crash in the ground and die. So I'd say the baby bird is born with knowledge of how to fly, even though it doesn't fly immediately. It has to wait till the wings, muscles develop, the wings develop, feathers grow on the wings, etc. A baby deer I have friends that observed a baby deer right outside the window of their home. They saw an adult deer standing still right by their window. And usually they're running around all over the place. So my friend and his wife were watching that deer. All of a sudden they saw coming out of the back end of that deer, a little baby came out, landed on the ground. And the mother turned around and looked at the baby and then started to walk away. And the baby stood up on all four and started to follow the mother. If that baby couldn't follow the mother, immediately that baby is going to die. Human babies are born with knowledge of how to walk. They don't walk until they develop other things. And when it comes time to walk, they walk. But within a very short time, they couldn't have learned how to walk, how to control this complicated control process. It has to be in memory. They have to be born with that control system in memory. It is conjectured that the memory storage and retrieval means for inborn knowledge is the same as for sensory knowledge gained during a lifetime. So I'm saying it's the same memory is used for knowledge that you're born with as it's used to store knowledge that you gained during your lifetime. Same mechanism of storage, same mechanism of retrieval. Now that's a big assumption, but I think it's reasonable. Nature tends to use the same tricks over and over again. This has to do with storage and retrieval in the living system. So at the moment of conception, DNA is taken from the mother and father to form a new cell. This single cell is the start of a new living animal. The DNA of the new cell contains the information, the blueprint needed to construct the living animal. The DNA also contains the inborn information that will be preloaded in the developing brain. Inborn information in the single original cell is stored in DNA, not in synapses and neurons. In that single cell, there are no synapses, there are no neurons. Yet that single cell is storing all the information that you're born with, which is considerable. We're saying the mechanism for storage and retrieval of the information gained during a lifetime is the same as that for storage and retrieval of inborn information. Now, the inborn information is stored in the nucleus of a single cell. I'm saying you have a lot of cells in the brain. Not only in the neurons and the glia and every other thing. The brain would have the capability of an enormous amount of storage. If a single cell could store all the information that you're born with, and you've got billions of cells in the brain, you've got enough for a lot of lifetimes. And it's not necessary to forget something in order to learn something new. So here are some wild guesses. All information stored in the brain's memory is stored in DNA or RNA. This is digital memory. Stored information is not stored in the neurons and dendritic tree. The neurons and the dendritic tree play a key role in association and retrieval of stored information. So that's as far as how the animal and human system works. This is really the point, is that the information stored in memory is not stored in the neural nets. It's stored and encoded somehow in DNA and RNA. And the neurons and dendritic tree and the synapses are used in retrieval, not storage. So you remember the original figure, the first figure that we had about the structure of the cognitive memory, that you have memory folders that can store information, and then you have neural nets that are used in the retrieval. Of course, if the neural nets are attacked by Alzheimer's, you find that the information could be stored in the brain, but you cannot get access to it. And there's evidence for that. People with Alzheimer's on a bad day cannot remember hardly anything. And then the next day could be a good day, and they remember all kinds of things. Well, all those things that they remembered on the good day had to be stored permanently in the brain. And on a bad day, the neural networks are not working well, and the retrieval process is not working. The difficulty is retrieval, not storage. So here is a quiz. Everybody who's heard the lecture is now going to take a quiz. Why do newborns sleep so much and less when they become kids? Why do babies cry so much and less as they grow older? Why do adults cry so little? Memory of young people is great. Why can't we remember life events that happened in our first few years? What is the connection between schizophrenia and sleepwalking? What did Sigmund Freud do that was right? Why does one often not remember performing acts of habit? What are habits? How are they related to addiction? How are they related to speech and locomotion? What causes conversations to wander? So those are simple little questions. If you understand everything in the lecture, you should be able to figure out what the answers are to all these questions. So you should write down all those questions and see if you can figure it out. Anyhow, thank you very much. Bye-bye.